Welcome to Zenith Global News, your eye on a world at the breaking point. We've got a packed briefing today, guiding you through 6 interconnected theaters. We'll start with the immediate fallout from the U.S.-Iran strikes, then examine the Hormuz peace negotiations and the nuclear framework inside it. From there, we'll look at the push to expand the Abraham Accords, how Pakistan is completely defying economic myths, the Quad stepping up in the Indo-Pacific, and finally, we'll wrap things up in New Delhi with the sunset of 113-year-old colonial relic. Let's dive right in. Section 1, U.S.-Iran strikes and fallout. We have to begin in our most volatile theater. Right now, there are very delicate ceasefire negotiations happening in Doha, trying to end a 3-month war. But as you've probably seen, those fragile efforts have been abruptly overshadowed by fresh military action. Okay, so picture being a diplomat handed 2 completely opposing dossiers. To understand the massive hurdle negotiators are facing, we have to look impartially at these conflicting narratives. On one side, the U.S. Central Command claims they conducted purely self-defense strikes in southern Iran to protect American troops, specifically targeting missile launch sites and boats trying to lay mines. But on the exact opposite side, Iran alleges a devastating attack on civilians. They claim U.S. precision strike missiles hit a residential area and a sports hall in Lamerd, tragically killing 24 people, including a 2-year-old and teenage athletes, and injuring over 130. Trying to keep parties at the negotiating table while navigating these diametrically opposed reports is an incredibly precarious balancing act. Section 2, Hormuz Peace and Nuclear Framework. Now, despite that active kinetic exchange, diplomats in Qatar are painstakingly trying to hammer out a 14-point memorandum of understanding. The big goal here? Halt the conflict and lift the blockades that are absolutely suffocating global energy markets. If they can agree on it, this framework actually provides a highly structured path to cool things down. On day 1, we'd see an immediate halt to warfare and an end to the naval blockades. By day 30, the target is to fully reopen the Strait of Hormuz, which is a massive artery for global trade, currently seeing just a fraction of its normal traffic. And then, by day 60, we hit a major deadline for a time-limited negotiation specifically dealing with Iran's enriched uranium stockpile. President Trump has actually stated he wants this nuclear dust destroyed, either in the U.S. or under international supervision. But getting to day 1, well, that is proving exceptionally difficult. As U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio noted on his flight to India, this peace agreement is currently stalled over exact wording. It's literally down to a word, a sentence. A major sticking point is the Strait of Hormuz itself. Rubio was very clear that the strait has to remain open and toll-free, calling any Iranian tolling system illegal. So this entire fragile peace basically hinges on perfectly aligning those few remaining sentences. Section 3, Abraham Accords expansion push. Adding a huge layer of complexity to these negotiations is a pretty unorthodox diplomatic maneuver. U.S. President Donald Trump is trying to leverage this potential Iran ceasefire to expand a totally different geopolitical initiative. Just look at the sheer scale of the ambition here. Trump has controversially stated that if he reaches an agreement with Iran, he expects this specific roster of influential Muslim-majority nations to simultaneously normalize relations with Israel. He's calling it a mandatory request to join the Abraham Accords. Now, countries like Egypt and Jordan already formally recognize Israel, but Trump is pushing for a mass integration to create what allies are calling a powerhouse for economic opportunity. However, this proposed expansion is hitting a massive diplomatic wall. Pakistan firmly rejected the proposal, and their defense minister, Khawaja Asif, really summed up the sentiment with this quote, highlighting a deep deficit of trust and ideological clashes. You see, for nations like Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, recognizing Israel is a deeply sensitive issue, heavily tied to a roadmap for Palestinian statehood. So, critics are arguing that linking the Iran ceasefire to the Abraham Accords might just be trading one diplomatic fantasy for another, complicating an already fragile process. Section 4. Pakistan defies economic myths. Now, Pakistan's firm stance against that Abraham Accords push is really fascinating when you look at their own domestic vulnerabilities. We're witnessing a masterclass in how a nation leverages its geopolitical prominence to survive. Check out the stark contrast in these numbers. The closure of the Strait of Hormuz battered global markets, leaving Pakistan with a massive $12 billion financing gap by June 2028. By all traditional economic theories, they should be in a full-blown crisis right now. But because of Pakistan's unlikely role as a Gulf peace broker, shifting global alliances are eagerly stepping in to fill the void. Saudi Arabia just deposited $3 billion and extended a $5 billion loan facility. And China, they eagerly stepped in with a $257 million panda bond. These powers recognize Pakistan's strategic importance, so they are effectively loosening Islamabad's borrowing constraints. This number right here, 25, tells you everything you need to know. That is the number of extraordinary bailouts Pakistan has historically received from the IMF. In diplomatic circles, you could say they practically have a dedicated parking spot at IMF headquarters. They fit the exact profile of a nation that should tip into distress right now. Yet, their local currency is stable and they just successfully re-entered the global bond market. Why? Because in today's shifting global landscape, strategic, military, and geographic value can actually outweigh standard economic vulnerabilities. Pakistan is literally defying the long-held myths of emerging market investing. Section 5. Quad expands Indo-Pacific cooperation. The ripple effects of all these shifting alliances bring us directly over to New Delhi, where diplomatic containment strategies are rapidly accelerating. Foreign ministers from the US, India, Australia, and Japan used their recent Quad meeting to launch some serious new initiatives. We're talking about a critical minerals framework and an energy security initiative to build up supply chain resilience. But crucially, they announced a maritime surveillance cooperation initiative starting in the Indian Ocean. That's a direct response to the fact that 60% of global maritime trade passes through the Indo-Pacific. They're even partnering to advance port infrastructure in Fiji, which is the very first time the Quad partners have worked together on a project like that. These are highly calculated chess moves to secure vital national interests in a shifting world. Section 6. Sunset for Delhi Gymkhana Club. Finally, while all these forward-looking frameworks are being built in India's capital, a very prominent relic of the old colonial power structure is facing its end. For over a century, the elite Delhi Gymkhana Club, which was founded way back in 1913, guarded its absolute exclusivity using this incredibly strict quota. 40% of memberships went to civil servants, 40% to defense services, and just 20% for outsiders or commoners. It relied heavily on generational networking rather than just wealth, cementing the club as the ultimate status symbol for India's ruling establishment. I mean, waitlists stretched up to 30 years just to get your foot in the door. But that era is coming to a close. Following heavy criticism from the National Company Law Tribunal, which quite bluntly stated that the club reeks of an imperial mindset, and a recent government eviction order, the sun is finally setting on this 27-acre bastion of inherited privilege. It's such a fascinating paradox, really, dismantling a colonial relic exactly as modern India takes a leading seat at the table of new global alliances. So, what does this all mean for us? From the tense waters of the Strait of Hormuz to the diplomatic halls of New Delhi, today's explainer reveals a world in unprecedented transition. We are seeing the limits of old economic myths, the extreme struggles of peacemaking, and the aggressive formation of new security frameworks. Which leaves us with one final, provocative question. As these old structures fall away and new alliances form, who will ultimately anchor the new global balance, and who gets to write the rules of the next world order? Make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Stay informed, stay aware, stay ahead. Only on Zenith Global News.